Good morning, everyone. So, for the next few days, you guys, as Hashem, we're going to learn about the topic of Kabbalah's oil. Kabbalah's oil, which translates as accepting the yoke. It's an abbreviation of really Kabbalah's oil, Malchus Shemayim, to accept upon ourselves the yoke of the sovereignty of heaven. And of course, this notion is not a Hasidic notion per se. The idea of Kabbalah's oil to accept upon ourselves the yoke of heaven. Obviously not a Hasidic idea specifically. It's a classic Jewish idea. In fact, it's one of the mitzvahs we're obligated to do twice daily. Shema is, in essence, in the most basic halachic level of the meaning of the mitzvah of Shema, is to accept upon ourselves the yoke of heaven, declare the oneness of Hashem, and accept upon ourselves that He's in charge of our lives. It's pretty much what it is. So it's not uniquely a Hasidic idea, but of course, Hasidus, which is all about building our relationship with Hashem, will have lots to say about the subject of Kabbalah. And there's a unique lens that Hasidus gives it, beginning with the Tanya. There's obviously also many ways we can approach the sugya of Kabbalah, the subject of Kabbalah within Hasidus. You have, for example, Nasa v'nishma. The Jewish people tell Hashem, we'll do, and then we will listen. Right, declaring that we'll do whatever you ask us. That's accepting upon ourselves the yoke of Hashem, and then we'll try to understand what you're saying. That's a subject in Judaism at large, and it's a subject in Chassidus. The same thing with the Medrash. The Rebbe speaks about this many times. The Medrash, which says, it's a Gemara actually. The Medrash as well, which says that first one is to accept upon himself the yoke of heaven, and then the yoke of mitzvahs. Meaning first, the yoke of the commander, Hashem himself, then the yoke of the commandment, second. Another subject. Like this, you can come at it from many different angles. Here, we're going to zero into one specifically, which is to think about what is the truest motivation to accept upon oneself the yoke of heaven. What's the motivation? What am I doing to accept upon myself the yoke of heaven? Specifically, highlighting the word accept. Right, we say it in our davening at Ma'ariv. Malchusei beratzon kiblu alayim. The sovereignty of heaven we accept upon ourselves willingly. And in Chassidus, in a number of places, it speaks about the difference between a king versus a dictator, a melech versus a moshel. A melech, a king, is willingly, the people willingly accept upon themselves the yoke of the king. A dictator is someone who imposes and forces his sovereignty on his subjects. So if that's the case, and it's Kabbalah's oil, not Kfiyas oil, we accept upon ourselves the yoke of heaven, not we are compelled to take upon ourselves the yoke of heaven, then we have to think about what makes us accept that yoke. And that's what we're looking at here. And even within that, it's a very broad subject, but we're going to be zeroing in to the Rebbe's take on this. And what I'm hoping to achieve at the end of this is to demonstrate ironically, the geschmack, the joy, and the pleasure that exists in Kabbalah's oil, accepting the yoke of heaven, when it's done correctly. Okay, so we're beginning here with the opening 10 lines of Perek Mal of Tanya, chapter 41 of Tanya, which many of us say every single day before we daven, as the Rebbe would often instruct. And in this 10, 15 lines, the Alter Rebbe lays out the thought process that induces that the person accept upon himself the yoke of heaven, Kabbalah's oil. And then we're going to learn a talk where the Rebbe unpacks line by line of these 15 lines or so.
Question.
So let's begin. Yeah.
The Rebbe would instruct someone to say Perek Mal before davening, before putting on Talis and Tefillin, before Rabbi Shmuel, before Hoidu.
I say right before Hoidu. I don't know when the Rebbe would have to ask my father, actually. Didn't my father once get instructed like that? Ask my father. I think he He may have been told to do that, if I remember correctly. I haven't asked him about it in a while. Okay, I'll have to ask him. Okay, so let's begin. Perek Mamalu, chapter 41. Baram, hard to translate the word baram, but it's something like however. However, Tzarech liyos, it must be lezicher and tamid, one consistently must remember. Reishis avoda, the beginning of one's service, the ikra, the primary, the shorsha, and the source. Each of these words must be unpacked. The Rebbe's actually not going, not here at least, not in the talk we're going to be reading. The Rebbe's not going to unpack these words. Elsewhere, the Rebbe does. But it's chapter 41. It's not chapter 1. There's already been 40 chapters discussing your relationship with Hashem. But in 41 begins the Alter Rebbe with something that in a way is the beginning. From a certain perspective, you can begin all of Tanya at 41, and you can almost look at everything till then as a preparation for 41. Because from 41 through the end is when the Alter Rebbe actually develops a system for building an emotional relationship with God. And he goes from step to step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, in terms of developing inner relationships and feeling for Hashem, all built around the two feelings of love and fear. And he takes us from one type of fear to another type of fear, one type of love, another type of love. So in 41, it begins the beginning. But when he tells us about stage 1, he doesn't just say this is stage 1, meaning he could have said, Baram, however you should know, Reishis Avoda, the beginning of one's service is, even though, and etc., go on to describe accepting upon ourselves the yoke of heaven. He doesn't simply say this is stage 1. He says, first of all, you have to always remember that this is stage 1. The Zikr and Tamid, which means even when you're at the stage 100, you're at this high, sublime, lofty level of love of Hashem. You still have to be remembering that you know what the beginning is? Accept upon yourselves the yoke of heaven. So it's not just Reishis Avoda, it's not just the beginning, but it's Zikr and Tamid. You always have to remember that it's the beginning. Additionally, it's Ikra. It's the primary. It's the primary service of Hashem, which means, again, even if when you're at level 100, so you have the sublime level of love of Hashem, what's the primary of all that? I've taken upon myself the yoke of heaven. And Shorsha, and it's the root, which means that when you're at level 100 and you're feeling the sublime levels of love for Hashem, not only do you have to remember that the beginning of this was accepting upon yourself the yoke of heaven, not only do you have to remember that the primary of this is the yoke of heaven, but you also have to remember that the feelings you have now, the root of it is you're accepting upon yourself the yoke of heaven. So it's not like I have the primary, the beginning, and then I have level 100. But the root of level 100 is this. So even though it's the beginning and entry level stage, as he develops the later chapters, this level of accepting upon yourself the yoke of heaven remains, quote, the lowest level. And he refers to it as such. He refers to it as Yirat Hata, the lower fear. And it is the entry level. He's going to develop beyond this higher, loftier, sublime level that he expects you to develop toward. But even as you develop on all these higher, loftier levels, this remains the primary, the source, and the beginning that's like in front of your eye the entire time. As you develop in deeper and deeper, more subtle levels of relationship with Hashem. Okay, so what is this? What is this Kabbalah's oil? That it's the beginning, it's the root, and it's the primary. And must always be remembered, Zikr and Tamid. Who, and that is, even though, as a rule, fear of Hashem, awe of Hashem, is the source for refraining from doing something wrong. I'm in awe of Hashem, so I don't want to do that which he doesn't want me to. I have fear of Hashem, so I'm not going to do that which he said not to. La'ava, and love of Hashem, is the source for lava'aseh tov, to do which is right. Right? So from that perspective, you would divide your behaviors into two different feelings. So I have one feeling, which is I don't want to ruin my connection to Hashem. I don't want to disappoint Hashem, and that's going to prevent me from doing the wrong thing. On the other hand, I want to connect to Hashem. I love Hashem. I want to connect. So I'm going to do that which is right. So there are two different feelings that result in two different behaviors. One is to refrain, and one is to engage. Nonetheless, you should know this is not enough. When it comes to refraining from doing a sin, of course, I have to have the fear. I have to remember that I don't want to betray Hashem. I have this awe and fear of Hashem's presence. I don't want to betray Him, so I'm not going to do that which is wrong. Says the Alter Rebbe, that feeling that I don't want to betray Hashem has to be there as well for the action, for doing that which is right. Loving Hashem is not enough of motivation to do that which Hashem asks. It cannot be only because I want to connect to you, Hashem. That cannot be the only reason for doing that which is right, because I want to connect to you. Well, Lapach said at the very least, he must first awaken, even for the motivation to do something. Following, right? No, even the motivation to do the mitzvahs. Meaning?
I don't know why love wouldn't be sufficient.
You're going to explain now. So why isn't love sufficient to motivate doing that which Hashem asks? So he's going to explain. Lefachis, at least, one must first awaken hayira hativis, the natural fear, natural awe that we all have in Hamosuteres Balev Kol Yisrael, that's hidden within the heart of every Jew, which is, what's the nature of that fear? As he explained in previous chapters, not to rebel against the king. Right? So different levels of awe and fear. We've talked about this and we learned in our Tanya classes, different levels of fear. One level of fear is, the highest level is the very notion of being in God's presence is embarrassing. It's a very lofty level. And the most basic level is, I don't want to rebel. Hashem said not to, I don't want to betray Him. That's the most basic level. And that level, I don't want to betray Hashem, exists within every single Jew. So the Alter is telling us that when we do a mitzvah, beyond I want to connect to you, Hashem, and that's why I'm doing it, there must be, first of all, I don't want to betray you, and you asked me to do it, so I'm going to do it. I don't want to betray you is also a motivation for doing that which is right. Now, the Alter Rebbe is going to go and like progressively lower the bar for entry for this level. How prominent does this feeling, I don't want to betray you, Hashem, need to be within the person? He's going to progressively lower the bar to make it easy for anybody to begin. Number one, it should be completely revealed in his heart. Like, revealed in his heart means is
should feel it.
He feels it. He's like, I can't betray Hashem. That would be like the ultimate. Or if you can't get that, at least it should be revealed in his mind. Even if he doesn't feel it, but at least in his mind, he should be aware of this. Tahainu, this is, and here he even lowers the bar even more, at least consider it in your thought, if not in your mind, which is a little bit of a lower level. Right? So first is, you should feel it. If you can't feel it, at least be aware, at least in your mind, it should be fully present. And if not, at least think about it. At least consider it. At least in his thoughts. What should you think? Now here gets to the why. Here gets to the motivation for why he should accept upon himself the yoke of heaven. So what's he thinking about? Godless Ein Sof Baruch Hu, the greatness of the infinite one, blessed be He. Umalchusoi, and the infinite one's sovereignty. Asher He Malchus Kol Olam, which is the sovereignty of all the universes, all the worlds. El Yonim V'Tachtonim, the higher worlds, the more spiritual worlds, the lower worlds. So He's sovereign over all of them. Number one. Number two, He fills all of these worlds. Number three, Soiviv Kolamim, He transcends all of these worlds. Like the verse reads, is it not that I, says God, fills the heavens and the earth? This indicates the level of transcendence, as the verse uses the word I, fill, as opposed to Mali Kol Haaretz Kavodai, that the world is filled with God's glory, glory implying a level lower. Here it's Ani Mali, I myself, the transcendent truth of Hashem envelops all the worlds. So now, having considered that God is sovereign of the entire world, four things actually: the greatness of God, his sovereignty over all worlds, he fills all worlds, and he transcends all worlds. Having considered all of that, now he considers he sets aside all of the worlds, the higher worlds and the lower worlds, and he singularly focuses his sovereignty on the Jewish people as a whole, and on him, the person thinking on me in particular. Okay, so God fills the entire world, he's everywhere, but he decides who is my people, the Jewish people, and you specifically. Key, because as the Gemara tells us, a person is obligated to say the world is created for me. So even though Hashem fills the entire world is his kingdom, nonetheless, the Jew is obligated to say the world is created for me. So Hashem uniquely positions his sovereignty on me. So thinking of all of this, so if Hashem uniquely focuses his sovereignty on me, in return, I accept upon myself his sovereignty.
Why is that supposed to bring it to Yira and opposed to Alva?
So the truth is, the feeling could be both. And we'll see from the Rebbe, it might actually be both. But why is this Yira? Because Yira means he's my king. Hashem has an entire world, and he says, you're my subject. My response is, yes, sir. That's the point.
Yeah,
That's Kabbalah,
sure, but Yira of Dafka.
Sorry?
But not necessarily Yira, right? Because he has this whole thing going on. He feels about the universe, and he takes all his attention, focuses on me. It's a privilege, right?
Okay, yeah, that's what I was going to spin it.
Huh.
Okay, that's what I was going to spin it. The privilege here, yeah. But I'm going to spin it. That's what I was going to explain it, yeah. The privilege to serve. But that's the...
It's a Kavazoyla, right?
Sorry? That's really the Kabbalah. As we're going to see, that's really what Kabbalah Sel means. Yeah. But the reason why it's Kabbalah Sel and it's fear, because it's not about my feelings. And which takes us back to your question, why isn't the love sufficient? Because at the end of the day, the difference between love and fear is that love places the emphasis on the one feeling that love, whereas fear places the emphasis on the one toward whom I have that fear. Right? Because in fear or awe, the feeling is to retreat inward. Because I'm in your presence, I want to minimize my presence. So if I want to do something and you don't want it, I'm not going to do it. Because that would be injecting my presence when it's supposed to be about your presence. Whereas love is, I want to express my feeling towards you. So it's true, it's towards you, and therefore it's only going to be in the way that you want it, because you asked me to do X. Right? But it's still at the end about me expressing how I feel. In the language of Tanya earlier, Yesh Mishayev, there is always someone who loves. It begins with I love you. I love Hashem. You can't escape that in love. In fear, in awe of Hashem, where it's about retreating inward, it's all about minimizing the sense of I. Right? But as we're going to see, ironically, this is the most empowering, as we'll see from the Rebbe's explanation. But that's why he's calling it fear here. That's why it's accepting upon myself the yoke of heaven. Right? And what's the motivation, as the Alter Rebbe tells us it here? Because Hashem chooses you to be subject. He's king over the entire universe, but he uniquely singles out you as a subject. And if Hashem comes, knocks on your door and says, hey, I want you to be my subject, what's your response? Yes, sir. That's the Kabbalah. So he on his part, Mekabbalah accepts upon himself Malchusa, his sovereignty, Liyois Melech Allah, that Hashem should be his king. Therefore, to serve him, the last is its own name, to do his will, not mine. Right? In all kinds of service like a servant. Right? So that's why it's a motivator also for doing that which is right. So now my doing the mitzvah is not only because I want to connect, because you asked. You're the king and you asked.
Tremendous power to motivate.
In this sense, right? So it's not fear. And as the chapter develops, he actually lowers the bar even more. Right? In terms of how you think about Hashem, and just to accept that you're in Hashem's presence and therefore do what he asked, even if you don't understand how great Hashem is. Right? He quotes Rabbi Levi Zakai, who says that a person should take upon himself the yoke of heaven, the fear of heaven, the same way he fears another human. You don't want someone else watching you as you sin. Treat Hashem the same way, which is a very low bar, which means, what do I know about Hashem? Nothing. I just know that he exists, like another human exists. But that's enough for me to say, I don't want to do something that he doesn't want. He even, by the way, says at one point that even if he doesn't have the fear, the mitzvah to serve Hashem is not tied up in the mitzvah to fear Hashem. And if you're lacking fear, okay, but at least you're doing the mitzvah of serving. But then he says, even that is considered fear, because at least you're doing it out of respect for him. Okay. Now he concludes, and then we'll get to the Rebbe's comment. Hashem nitzav alav. Now Hashem stands above him. Hashem stands right by him. Okay, so he's thought about the fact that Hashem is choosing him as a subject. So in response, he says, yes, sir, you're my king. And now Hashem is standing right here, which changes everything. Because you could have a king who lives in his palace, and I live at home, and I've accepted that he be my king, and that I be his subject. I've accepted upon myself that. Good. So I'm going to do what he asks. Also good. But now it's a little different, because I've accepted upon myself that the king be my king, but I'm living in his palace, and I'm living in his room, because he's standing here. It's not as if Hashem is somewhere else in his palace, and I'm here in this universe accepting upon myself his sovereignty. Hashem nitzav alav. Hashem is standing upon me, because the entire world is filled with God's glory. So it doesn't matter where I am, I'm always standing in the presence of the king. Umabet olav, and the king is looking at me, and he's investigating my innards and my heart. He's looking inward at me, and he wants to know, are you serving me appropriately? Right? I didn't have the next line, but the next line is, and therefore he has to serve him. He has to serve him as if he's standing in front of the king, as opposed to serving him as a king who lives at a distance. Right? And as the Shulchan Aruch says right at the beginning, that a person has to place the presence of Hashem in front of him the entire time. And Ein Adoima, one cannot compare the way a person behaves when he's alone in his own home versus when he's in the presence of the king. Okay, so this is, oops, what happened to my pages here? Okay, this works. No. Okay, so that was Perek Malav Tanya. Right, and if you learn it on its face, as Adam is pointing out, the primary here is fear. It's a fear. You don't want to mess up. You're in the presence of the king, and the presence of the king, you're trembling, and that's the point. So the Rebbe isn't going to change it in any. None of those facts are going to change, but as the Rebbe does, puts on a whole other pair of glasses, and everything is seen in a different light, with a whole different geschmack, with a whole different beauty and really a pleasure that comes out of this Kabbalah cell. So what's to say there? It's 6:56. We have to stop here, right? Because you have to be on time, right? Where's DB? He's here, I guess. Okay, Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow we'll see.
Yeah, I'm here.
You're here in MTC, I assume, right?
Yeah, I'm walking in.
Okay, so Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow we'll continue and look at the Rebbe Sicha, a very geschmack Sicha, where the Rebbe unpacks line by line of this paragraph we just learned. Okay, have a wonderful day, Yidden.
How
Shkoyach.